leave off yesterday?
Embargo to go on.
Alright, so the embargo's happening. So I'll pull my hand-dating map for those 2 people around the world who are watching. Maybe not, maybe just the 1 person. Ooh, my website got to 90,000 hits the other day. How exciting is that?
That's pretty cool.
I like to think so. Okay, so you're Japan. Somebody raise your hand and tell me why the attack on Pearl Harbor makes sense. Why does the attack on Pearl Harbor make sense, JC?
Because Japan, or U.S. was expanding their sphere of influence, so Japan wanted to hit first while the U.S. weren't necessarily so.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at all the evidence you guys have just been talking about, right? And let's put it now, look at like you're Japan. So you're Japan, you have expanded into China. Did America like when you expanded into China?
No.
You just went over the Panay incident, right, in 1937, and obviously Roosevelt is not Hoover. Remember, you're Japan, you invaded Manchuria, Hoover didn't do much about it. Now you went into China in the Panay incident, and Roosevelt's pretty pissed, and they're calling on you to leave, and if not, now they're going to put economic sanctions on you. So now you got economic sanctions. You've got a fleet that's moved to Hawaii. You've got America increasing its amount of military spending. You've got a 2-front navy. You've got a draft. You've got the Lend-Lease Act. And remember, Japan is allied with Germany and Italy, right? So if you're Japan, what are you thinking? Do what? America's preparing for war. Now think about your assets and liabilities. What, if you're Japan, what are your liabilities relative to fighting America?
They're a lot bigger and more technologically sound, industrial-wise.
I don't know if they're more technologically sound, but they're certainly bigger, right? And if you are Japan, invading mainland America, which, by the way, people thought Japan was going to invade mainland America after Pearl Harbor. Looking back, that's kind of a ridiculous notion. But if you're Japan, America has all this space to make crap, right? And they have this huge amount of opportunity to do more than they've been doing in terms of industrial capacity. Maybe you gotta strike soon, right? This is the heart at why they decided to strike at Pearl Harbor. In fact, when in late 41, when Hideki Chojo became the prime minister, they start looking at these as options. In fact, as early as December 1st, or say as late as December 1st, right? So when was Pearl Harbor?
December 7th.
December 7th. As late as December 1st, the Japanese sent officials to Washington to negotiate trying to end the embargo against Japan. And it was, if these negotiations work and they stop embargoing us, then there won't be an attack. If these negotiations fail, then there will be an attack. I mean, this is less than a week before the attack. And the negotiations did not work out, and they moved forward. Who was the... Does anyone know the Japanese admiral who was in charge of the planning and execution of the attack on Pearl Harbor? Does anyone know? He's ultra famous. His name is Admiral Yamamoto. I don't think Yamamoto will ever be on a test, but just like for your pop culture knowledge, Admiral Yamamoto was the guy. In fact, we killed Admiral Yamamoto during the war, and it was the most. If you ever want to read a crazy story about how someone died, Admiral Yamamoto was one of them. I'll get to that in a minute, but. So, in the early morning hours of December 7th, which is a Sunday, the Japanese attacked at Pearl Harbor. And, actually, I think I've got some. But essentially, there were bad parts and good parts of the United States. The bad part is, obviously, we were attacked and we lost some destroyers. We lost almost 3,000 men. This was the most devastating attack on American soil, on a base we've ever had from a foreign national like that wasn't in America. How are we lucky, though?
kept Arizona.
What year was it?
41. December 7th, 1941. This is the last thing that's going to lead us to, this. Does anyone know why we were actually lucky?
Weren't they running training exercises out in the bay?
Yeah, if you're Japan and you are attacking, what two types of ships, specifically one, but what two types of ships are you going after? Raise your hand and tell me what's the mother load.
Destroyers and aircraft carriers.
Okay, well then destroyers, battleships, right? And the big one is aircraft carriers. Those take forever to make. Battleships, I'm going to give you the worst drawings of naval ships ever, okay? If this is a carrier, right? It really does have a little thing that juts out right here. That actually does happen. That's actually probably the best one I've ever done. All right, if you're an aircraft carrier, and aircraft carriers were important early on. They're going to become vital. In fact, World War II Pacific War is going to show us the future of naval battles, right? But you have an aircraft carrier. This is actually where all the control and command center is. And then what's an aircraft carrier? What's the whole point of an aircraft carrier? Yeah, that's what it does. But what's the point of having an aircraft carrier?
So you can make it like a central.
Do what?
They don't have to get to land. They can land and take off on sea.
It used to. Think about between World War I and World War II, just how far technology moved with wars, right? In World War I, you had airplanes, but they were pretty limited, right? There was some fighting, not a ton. The ships, right? The Navy had, the big thing were these battleships, and these battleships have really, really thick armor and these big giant guns that just shoot. And, essentially what's happening is you get your big battleships over here, a mile or so away or whatever, you got a battleship, and you just slug it out old school size, right? And massive armor that these ships have and massive cannons. Aircraft carriers, though, and so now that you have these planes, the theory was you had to have a naval base, right, or an air base. You had to have a base for the planes to take off. But with an aircraft carrier, you can park your aircraft carrier close to where you want to be or close to other ships, and you can actually fight. I mean, how many guns does an aircraft carrier have? Aircraft carriers, they're not armed, really. They're just tons and tons of planes. And so what happens is aircraft carriers have what's called a carrier group, which they're surrounded by destroyers and cruisers and battleships, right? And so they're protected. It's why the whole... actually, isn't it weird that we call that board game Battleship instead of carrier? It should be called aircraft carrier. You ever played Battleship before? Yeah, it's aircraft carrier sounds way less, yeah. But Tiger's right. Luckily for America, we had several of our carriers actually out to sea doing maneuvers, and the planes coming in completely missed them. So while the Oklahoma was sunk, they did miss all the aircraft carriers, and this was something that the Japanese regretted. Obviously, let me see if I can get down real fast to it. Okay. Yamamoto, though, in fact, when Yamamoto, he was famed for saying after the United States was bombed, he said, "We've woken a sleeping giant. We didn't get their carriers, and now we've just poked the dragon." For 400 years, who was the most powerful country in the world? Britain. But you don't ever know when they actually became powerful. They just sort of, over the centuries became increasingly more powerful, right? Same thing with Greece a long time ago. Same thing with Rome, after that. The Ottoman Empire, right? You see them getting stronger and stronger. You never actually get to say, here is the day they became the bully on the block. But America's different. We actually can say that day. What day did America become the strongest nation in the history of the world? December 8th. December 8th, hit the lights, is the day that we became the strongest one. Now, this is the Lend-Lease Act. This is how much money we were giving, and this is early on in 41. Look, $48 billion, that is a lot of money in 1941. Still a lot of money. It's like when I make, It takes me like 3 years to make that. And I have to work extra and give my planning period if I want to make that kind of money. But look, the Great Britain, 31 billion, and even the Soviet Union were giving money to. So we are really helping out the Allies. This is before we got in the war. And after we got in the war, we didn't stop. If you want to know what made America win, and if you want to know why America was able to defeat and become so strong, it's not, I mean, our soldiers, I mean, how many of you guys have family that fought in World War II? Probably everyone does. Right? And this was the generation that sort of, where are we at?
1039.
Okay. Like, they call this generation the greatest generation. Why do they call this the greatest generation? Well, they lived through right before World War II. They lived through the Depression. All right, we're done with the Depression. Now we got to go fight fascism. And then we beat fascism. And then we create the largest middle class in the history of humanity. And then we beat communism. And then we retire. That's pretty good. And then we hand it off to our kids and our grandkids who are weak and pathetic. Right? That's us. Yeah, I mean, have your parents or you ever been asked to have to really sacrifice for you're saying that when I was in England, my biggest, I mean, first of all, I got to go study in England for 4 months. How ridiculous is that? People back then didn't get that. But I had to have, how bad is European ketchup? It's the worst. It's the worst. There's no salt. It's the worst. In my generation, I was like, this ketchup is unbearable. That was the biggest sacrifice ever. Here I am having to live in Europe and not having decent ketchup. In my world, that was unbearable. My grandmother grew up with a dad who was a coal miner, right? Had to walk through snow in Utah. And I'm like, no salt in my ketchup? My God, I can't live like this. When my parents came to visit me, they were like, all right, Corey, what do you want us to bring you? And they thought we were going to talk about pictures or memento. All I want is a bunch of ketchup out of you. All right? And my parents had ketchup in their suitcases when they showed up. They're like, here's your ketchup. I was like, you can go home now. I've got what I need. I would say you should bring my penguin with me, but of course I had him the whole time.
Oh, don't play Boogie Woogie Bugle?
I think we're supposed to, but I don't want to play it.
Oh, I like this one.
All right, here is Pearl Harbor. Here's actually the base. Pearl is a huge naval base. I mean, obviously it's still there. Pearl is a huge naval base, and here are the ships and where they're docked. And so if you're in Japan, it's kind of a turkey shooting, right? You have a bunch of planes, because there were, you can stop it, sorry if you want.